Tonight, a government official arrested in the largest welfare fraud in U.S. history. $5 billion stolen by an international drug cartel.
At 4:47 this morning, federal agents executed coordinated operations across Minneapolis and the surrounding region. What we discovered represents the largest welfare fraud scheme in United States history, a $5.2 billion criminal enterprise operated by the Sinaloa Cartel and facilitated by corrupt officials at the highest levels of state government. This was not simple fraud. This was systematic infiltration. This was a cartel occupation of American institutions. And what you are about to hear will change how you understand the vulnerabilities in our social safety net. The numbers were staggering. 73 fraudulent daycare facility, 2,847 fabricated children, $5.2 billion in stolen taxpayer funds, 19 months of investigation. And at the center of it all, a woman who had built an empire on the backs of children who never existed, and a state official who had sold his authority to one of the most dangerous drug cartels in the Western Hemisphere. If you think corruption at this scale is impossible in America, stay with me. What comes next will prove you wrong. 4:47 a.m. Minneapolis, Minnesota. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees. Frost covered every surface like a warning written in ice. The streets of the Cedar Riverside neighborhood were empty, except for 3 black Chevrolet Suburban that sat motionless outside a building on the 1800 block of Riverside Avenue. Inside those vehicles, 31 federal agents representing the FBI, ICE, and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General prepared for a breach they had been planning for 574 days. They had followed money through 14 countries. They had cracked encryption protocols used by cartel financial networks. They had traced shell companies from Minneapolis to Mexico City to Dubai. And now, in the frozen silence before dawn, they were about to dismantle an operation that had turned Minnesota's child care system into a money laundering terminal for the Sinaloa Cartel. The target was the Bright Futures Learning Academy, a licensed daycare facility that, according to state records, served 412 children from low-income families. Federal and state subsidies had deposited $71 million into its accounts over the previous 2 fiscal years. The facility's director, a 48-year-old woman named Amina Khalif Hassan, had received commendations from the Minneapolis mayor's office. She had been photographed with state legislators. She had served on advisory boards for early childhood education reform. At 4:51 a.m., the breach began. Flashbangs detonated. The front door exploded inward under the force of a tactical ram. FBI agents in black tactical gear poured through the entrance like a flood of judgment finally arriving. They moved through hallways with weapons raised, clearing rooms with precision born from hundreds of similar operations. But this time, something was different. This time, they found nothing. No children, no teachers, no life. The facility was pristine. Classroom doors stood open to reveal cribs that had never been used, toys still wrapped in factory packaging, educational posters hanging perfectly straight on walls had never witnessed a single lesson. The lead agent, a 16-year veteran of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, walked through the building in silence that felt heavier than any gunfire. He opened a toy chest in the infant room. The toys inside were arranged with geometric precision, untouched by human hands. In the administrative office, investigators found the nerve center. Filing cabinets contained enrollment records for 412 children, complete with birth certificate, immunization records, social security numbers, and parent signatures. Every document was fabricated. The social security numbers had been purchased from identity brokers operating on encrypted marketplaces. The birth certificates had been manufactured using templates stolen from county offices across 5 states. The signatures had been generated by artificial intelligence trained to replicate human handwriting with statistical variation that would pass standard verification. This was not amateur fraud. This was industrial-scale identity manufacturing. But the discovery that changed everything waited in a steel-reinforced storage room behind the director's desk. When forensic technicians cut through the lock, they found $63 million in cash, bundled in vacuum-sealed bags and stacked floor to ceiling. Sitting on top of the money were 4 encrypted satellite phones, a laptop containing financial records written in code, and a single photograph that made every agent in the room understand the true scope of what they were facing. The photograph showed Amina Khalif Hassan standing beside a man whose face triggered immediate recognition in federal databases. That man was Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa Cartel and son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. He was one of the primary architects of the cartel's expansion into financial crimes and money laundering operations across North America. At that moment, the FBI understood. This was not welfare fraud. This was a cartel money laundering operation embedded in the American social safety net, funded by taxpayer dollars and protected by corrupt officials who had transformed compassion into a weapon. By 11:30 a.m., federal cyber forensics specialists had begun extracting data from the seized servers and encrypted devices. What they discovered was a financial architecture so sophisticated it rivaled the operational networks of legitimate multinational corporations. The operation had a code name buried in the encrypted files. Analysts found repeated references to something called Operation Desert Rose. The name appeared in transaction log, authorization protocols, and encrypted communications between facility directors across the upper Midwest. This was not a single daycare scheme. This was a regional infrastructure project designed to siphon billions from American taxpayers. The money flows were staggering in their complexity. Funds deposited into daycare accounts were immediately transferred to shell companies registered in Delaware, Wyoming, and South Dakota, states with minimal corporate transparency requirements. From there, the money moved through a cascade of intermediary accounts. First stop, the Cayman Islands, where 3 holding companies with names like Horizon Capital Management and Northern Star Investments received wire transfers totaling hundreds of millions. Second stop, the United Arab Emirates, where the money was converted into cryptocurrency and then back into traditional currency through exchanges operating in regulatory gray zone. Third stop, Kenya, where a network of import-export companies provided the final layer of legitimacy. The ultimate destination was a series of accounts controlled by Sinaloa cartel financial operatives in Culiacan, Mexico. The system was designed with redundancy and obfuscation at every level. If one node was compromised, the network could route around it. If one shell company was investigated, 10 others stood ready to absorb the flow. The cartel had not just exploited American bureaucracy. They had studied it, mapped it, and rebuilt it to serve their purposes. The most damning discovery came from the authorization protocols embedded in the system's architecture. Every transfer exceeding $10 million required digital approval from a single individual identified in the system only as Shepherd 7. When analysts cross-referenced the cryptographic signature associated with Shepherd 7 against federal databases, they found a match that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The signature belonged to a laptop registered to Marcus Webb, the Minnesota Commissioner of Human Services, a political appointee who had overseen the state's child care subsidy program for 7 years. Marcus Webb had championed accessibility reforms that reduced verification requirements for daycare providers. He had personally signed licensing approvals for 47 facilities now identified as fraudulent. He had testified before the state legislature about the importance of removing barriers that prevented vulnerable families from accessing services. And according to the encrypted financial records, he had received more than $23 million in payments routed through offshore accounts and a real estate trust registered in his brother's name. This was not negligence. This was not bureaucratic oversight. This was command-level collusion between a senior state official and a transnational drug cartel. Marcus Webb had weaponized compassion. He had transformed the social safety net into a cartel ATM. He had sold his authority to an organization responsible for flooding American communities with fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. One federal prosecutor reviewing the evidence said something that would later appear in court filing. He said this was not corruption. It was engineered treason. If you believe that public officials who betray their oath to serve cartel interests deserve maximum accountability, tap the like button. Comment justice if you want this story to reach more people. At 2:34 a.m. the following morning, a federal command center activated in a converted warehouse facility in downtown Minneapolis. The space had been transformed into a joint operations hub for FBI, ICE, DEA, DHS, and U.S. Marshal Service personnel. On the main wall hung a massive digital map of the upper Midwest. Red markers pulsed across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Each marker represented a confirmed node in Operation Desert Rose. There were 73 facilities in total. At 4:15 a.m., the largest coordinated federal operation in Minnesota history began. More than 1,200 federal agents mobilized simultaneously across 5 states. In Minneapolis alone, 34 SWAT teams breached facilities within a 2-hour window. Black Hawk helicopters provided aerial surveillance and rapid transport. Armored vehicles established perimeters around high-value targets. ICE agents coordinated with State Highway Patrol to establish checkpoints on major interstate corridors. The Sinaloa cartel had built a fortress inside America's welfare system, and now the federal government was tearing it down with overwhelming force. The raids yielded immediate and devastating results. At a facility in St. Paul, agents discovered a basement converted into a currency processing center. 19 workers sat at industrial counting machines, sorting and banding cash that arrived in duffel bags from across the region. The total recovered from that single location exceeded $34 million. Investigators also seized ledgers documenting transactions with cartel logistics coordinators operating in Arizona, Texas, and California. In Milwaukee, tactical teams breached a facility that state records showed as caring for 380 children. The building was empty except for a server farm containing encrypted hard drives linked to financial networks spanning 18 countries. The servers were processing transactions for other cartel operations, including drug distribution network and human trafficking routes along the southern border. In Des Moines, agents found a facility operating as a front for migrant smuggling. 23 individuals were discovered in a hidden compartment beneath the building's foundation, including 7 minors. They had been transported from Central America through cartel-controlled routes and were being held for labor exploitation in agricultural operations across Iowa and Nebraska. But the most significant discovery came from a property outside Rochester, Minnesota. State records listed the address as a commercial storage facility with no connection to child care services, but utility records told a different story. The facility consumed more electricity than a small hospital. Water usage exceeded 150,000 gallons per week. Thermal imaging from surveillance aircraft showed heat signatures consistent with industrial chemical processing. When tactical teams breached the building at 5:23 a.m., they found a fully operational drug super. The production floor spanned 4 levels connected by industrial elevators. Conveyor belts moved product through automated packaging systems. Chemical vats produced fentanyl precursors at industrial scale. The facility was producing an estimated 50 tons of fentanyl per month, enough to kill every person in North America multiple times over. The funding for this operation came directly from Operation Desert Rose. The stolen child care subsidies had been laundered through shell companies and used to purchase precursor chemicals from suppliers in China, manufacturing equipment from legitimate industrial vendors, and the silence of everyone who might have asked questions. The cartel had built a closed loop: steal from the government, wash the money, produce the drugs, destroy the communities, and use the chaos to steal more. By noon, the scale of the arrests became clear. More than 340 individuals had been taken into federal custody across the 5-state region. Among them were facility directors, accountants, identity forgers, cartel logistics coordinators, and corrupt public officials at multiple levels of government. Marcus Webb was arrested at his vacation home on Lake Minnetonka. He offered no resistance. He simply asked if he could call his attorney before being handcuffed. Investigators later discovered he had been preparing to flee the country. His passport was in his briefcase. A one-way ticket to Panama sat on his kitchen counter, scheduled to depart in 72 hours. As investigators examined the seized servers and financial records, they discovered that Operation Desert Rose had compromised dozens of individuals within Minnesota's state government and law enforcement agencies. The cartel had not just exploited the system, they had colonized it. 21 employees of the Minnesota Department of Human Services had received payments for expediting license approvals and overlooking obvious irregularities during facility inspections. 9 county inspectors had accepted bribes to file false compliance reports. 4 state legislators had received campaign contributions from shell companies linked to the network. The money had been disguised as donations from small business owners and community organizations, but the trail led back to cartel financial operatives. The corruption extended into law enforcement. Federal analysts examined patrol records, communication logs, and internal emails from agencies across the region. What they found was systematic compromise. 23 officers from the Minneapolis Police Department had received payments from accounts linked to Operation Desert Rose. The payments were disguised as consulting fees for security assessments that never occurred. In exchange, these officers had provided advance warning of compliance inspection. They had altered patrol routes to avoid facilities during critical cash transfer periods. They had leaked information about ongoing investigations to facility directors, who then alerted cartel coordinators. The betrayal extended to federal agencies. 5 ICE officers stationed in Minnesota had been receiving payments for more than 3 years. Their role was devastating in its simplicity. They identified individuals within immigrant communities who could be coerced into participating in the fraud scheme. They used their authority to threaten deportation against anyone who refused to cooperate. They transformed immigration enforcement into a recruitment tool for the Sinaloa cartel. One honest ICE agent, a 13-year veteran who had served with distinction, broke down during her interview with internal affairs investigators. She had suspected something was wrong for years. She had filed reports about irregularities in her colleagues' behavior. Those reports had been buried. She'd been transferred to administrative duties. She'd been told her concerns were unfounded and that she was damaging morale. Now she understood. The people burying her reports were themselves on the cartel payroll. She said she had joined the agency to protect the country, and instead, she had watched it be sold piece by people wearing the same badge. This was not corruption. It was a parallel enforcement system. The cartel had created a second police force operating inside the legitimate one, using badges and authority to protect criminal operations, while honest officers were systematically sidelined. The investigation revealed that Operation Desert Rose was not confined to the upper Midwest. It was a node in a much larger network spanning the entire continental United States. Federal analysts mapping the money flows discovered connections to similar operations in 11 other states. In California, a network of 34 fraudulent daycare facilities had been funneling money to Sinaloa cartel operations in Los Angeles and San Diego. In Texas, 27 facilities operated as fronts for migrant smuggling and drug distribution networks along the border. In Arizona, 19 facilities were linked to cartel-controlled human trafficking routes. The total estimated theft across all networks exceeded $17 billion over a 6-year period. This was not a regional problem. This was a national infrastructure project designed by the Sinaloa cartel to systematically drain American social programs and convert taxpayer dollars into cartel revenue. The operational sophistication was staggering. The cartel had studied American bureaucracy with the precision of a military strategist analyzing enemy defenses. They understood that social programs prioritized accessibility over verification. They understood that bureaucracies were afraid to ask too many questions for fear of being accused of discrimination. They understood that political correctness could be weaponized to avoid scrutiny. They understood that compassion could be exploited. They had built an empire on those weaknesses. Among the seized files, investigators discovered a document that would later be classified and restricted to congressional leadership. The document outlined a long-term strategy called Proyecto Fortaleza, or Project Fortress. The goal was explicit: to establish permanent cartel infrastructure inside American social service system that would be politically impossible to dismantle. The strategy relied on creating dependencies. Once communities became reliant on fraudulent facilities for childcare, closing those facilities would create hardship for families who had done nothing wrong. The political cost of enforcement would be higher than the cost of allowing the fraud to continue. The cartel understood that democracies move slowly and that bureaucracies prioritize avoiding disruption over pursuing justice. They had calculated that America would tolerate theft if the alternative was admitting systemic failure. One senior FBI analyst reviewing the strategy document said it was the most sophisticated infiltration operation he had seen in 30 years of counterintelligence work. He said the cartel had studied America better than America had studied itself. At 6 p.m., the Attorney General held a press conference in Washington. The confirmed financial loss to American taxpayers stood at $5.2 billion from the Minnesota network alone. That figure represented child care subsidies stolen from families who needed them. It represented early childhood education programs that had been defunded because money was diverted. It represented the future of children who had been abandoned by a system designed to protect them. But the human cost could not be measured in dollars. Investigators estimated that the fentanyl produced by the Rochester Superlab had been responsible for more than 18,000 overdose deaths across the Midwest over the previous 4 years. Each of those deaths had a name. Each had a family. Each had been someone's child, parent, sibling, or friend. The stolen money had been converted into poison and distributed through communities that were already struggling with addiction, poverty, and despair. The cartel had used America's compassion to fund America's destruction. They had taken money meant to help vulnerable children and transformed it into weapons that killed vulnerable adults. The cruelty was not incidental, it was strategic. Federal prosecutors announced that charges would be filed against 289 individuals. The charges ranged from wire fraud and money laundering to drug trafficking, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus Webb faced a potential sentence of life in prison without parole. Amina Khalif Hassan remained at large, believed to have fled the country through cartel-controlled transit route. An international arrest warrant had been issued through Interpol, but intelligence suggested she was already in Mexico under cartel protection. The facilities are closed now. The servers have been seized. The money has been frozen in accounts across 19 countries. But the damage cannot be undone. The children who lost access to legitimate child care because funds were diverted to fraud cannot get those years back. The families destroyed by fentanyl cannot be made whole. The trust that communities placed in institutions designed to help them has been shattered. The honest public servants who tried to raise alarms and were silenced cannot recover the years they spent being gaslit by their own agencies. This case forces a reckoning with vulnerabilities embedded in American social programs. For decades, the priority has been accessibility, getting money to people quickly and with minimal barriers. That compassion was weaponized. The Sinaloa cartel understood that bureaucracies are afraid to ask hard questions. They understood that efficiency often means reduced verification. They understood that political correctness could be exploited to avoid scrutiny. They built a $5 billion empire on those weaknesses. The investigation into Operation Desert Rose proved that the most dangerous threats do not always announce themselves with violence. Sometimes they arrive wearing the clothing of community leaders. Sometimes they fill out paperwork and attend ribbon-cutting ceremonies and collect commendations from mayors. Sometimes they smile at cameras while stealing the future from beneath our feet. The super lab in Rochester has been demolished. The network has been dismantled. But the question echoes across every state in America. How many other facilities are operating right now, collecting millions while children go without? How many other systems have been colonized by organizations that wish us harm? How many other Marcus Webbs are sitting in state offices, signing approvals and collecting payments? This story is a warning. Power does not always require violence. Sometimes it only requires patience. Sometimes it only requires finding the gaps in systems built on trust and exploiting them until there is nothing left. The Sinaloa cartel did not need to invade America. They simply needed to fill out the right forms. If you believe we need a complete audit of every social program in America, if you believe that accountability must reach every level of government, comment exposed below. Share this story so others understand what was discovered beneath the surface of a Minneapolis daycare. Stay vigilant, stay informed. The threat is not always visible, and the enemy does not always wear a uniform.